We've been talking about Belichick being out of here for a year and a half. Hardy made a good point after the show yesterday. When that news broke yesterday, it was weird because it's like breaking news, but like it's a topic we've been discussing as if it was going to happen for 6 months. So like,
it's weird that you can't talk about how it's going to happen anymore. And it's weird how, like, after this week, Bill Belichick is a lot less of a topic of conversation for you, right?
Until he's done coaching, I think that it's going to be like a Brady
but I mean,
thing.
like, I think, like, when we get to next week, it's probably a little bit more like, okay, like, is the Mayo thing going to get pushed over the goal line? What does this look like? But it was nationally, the Patriots become a lot less interesting, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
It was news yesterday, but it wasn't a surprise.
Right.
So now it's time to react to all this. I mean, for all I know, you could have had this column written since the Germany game. And going back to your column, that's kind of when I think things started going down a path where it was irreversible. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought it up in your column because how important it was to Robert Kraft, how he attended the walkthrough. He's in the locker room. He's doing things that he doesn't normally do, expressing the importance and the impact and the gravitas of this game. And as you point out, it's just
it was like
borderline clown show, and then Matt gets pulled and Zappy throws the interception, and it was an embarrassment.
The dysfunction. That's where the Jack Jones, one of the anecdotes I had in there was the Jack Jones thing boiling over, which was like, I was told like he was really angry about being benched the week before against the Commanders. And like, that was after he was late to the team hotel. It's just a guy who flat out didn't get it. Right. And then like he comes back against the Colts, and he hadn't played well against the Commanders, so I think he plays 10 snaps in the first half and explodes in the locker room. And his teammates try to calm him down. Doesn't work. They don't play him in the second half, and he's cut 4 days later. And so, I think it's like the amount of dysfunction that happened in Germany and the pressure that everybody was feeling because Kraft was sort of hovering over everything there. And people felt like the importance of this to Kraft. And I just think that was really, it was over. It was over. And I was even asked like over the last month, and I think you guys have probably asked this question of me, but is there anything Bill can do to save himself? My answer was no, because no one thinks he can't coach. No one thinks that he forgot how to do that job. The problem isn't that. The problem is staffing. The problem is filling the roster. And there was nothing they were going to do in those wins against Denver and Pittsburgh or competitive losses to the Chiefs and Bills that was going to fix that.
Can you take us into, you have one story in particular in your article in the MMQB, which I'm plugging over and over, so you can feel free to share the story. There was one particular anecdote you had about the draft and how Belichick made decisions about the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so this was and I've told this story before, but I didn't.
Not this with this little nugget in it. No.
Yeah, so like A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel were here together on the same day. The scouts here really liked those two.
Deebo Samuel, who just had the best season receiving in the history of the Dallas Cowboys, a team that's been around for a while. Go ahead.
Niners.
Oh, Niners. Oh, no, Niners. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So they were here together and you're thinking of CeeDee Lamb, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of CeeDee Lamb.
Anyway, but yeah. So two really good players. So the Patriots scouts really liked. Interestingly enough, they weren't wild about DK Metcalf. So it's not like the scouts had everything right that year, but they really liked A.J. Brown. They really liked Deebo Samuel. And those two guys came in together on a visit, and they had been traveling together all week. It was like a Thursday or a Friday. So it just so happened that their schedules coincided. I believe those two have the same agent, so they were doing like the circuit of teams together. And so by the end of the week, they'd become like really comfortable with each other, as you would if you were traveling with a guy all week, right? And so, like during breaks or whatever in the day, they're joking around and, giving each other crap and everything else. And people with the Patriots thought like Bill took that as these guys aren't taking this seriously. And like, I think you might remember Deebo said something like, I'll see you in a month or Bill or something like that on his Instagram. So there were some like things there, but it was like where it was really just the two guys had a rapport with each other. And the two guys actually are really good guys beyond just being good players, because they have this thing where they were horsing around with each other. Bill was like, oh, yeah, they didn't take this seriously enough. Meanwhile, N'Keal Harry, who the scouts weren't high on, right, and who the scouts had told Bill, this guy's a little bit of a mark as a con artist, right? Like, so he comes in and he kills his 30 visit and does great. And Bill's got the personal relationships with Todd Graham and Herm Edwards, who were his two coaches at Arizona State. And so it was an example, and probably the flashpoint for a lot of the scouts. It was an example of what had been happening for like 3, 4, 5 years there, where as scouts started to leave the building and take jobs other places, Bill became less trusting of them and leaned way more into my own personal experiences, my own personal experience with the player, my relationship with his coach, over the work that they had done over the course of an entire year to assess the players.
And then you bring up Jack Jones and then Trent Brown. And so if you think about how he's drafting and he's using it, these guys are horsing around in this interview. Now flash forward to 2023, and he's got Trent Brown and Jack Jones.
And all of their emotional baggage that comes with them.
And the Trent Brown thing was really strange.
Yeah. So, like, there was a lot of people that were like, why is this guy still here? And I know, like, even like when he was sick, like there were, like I had heard at the time, there was problems as far as communication and, getting like, all right, like, when are you going to be back in? They cut him a lot of slack. And I think that was, to me, like, that was endemic to the problem, right? Because I know a lot of people felt like with the crap that they dealt with Jack Jones, with the crap that they dealt with Trent Brown 5, 10, 15 years ago, it would have been out. Those guys would have been out. And not that the Patriots have always taken risks, right? But it's like, where's your tolerance with that risk? And it used to be like, okay, like, we're going to take a guy when he's down low, when he's low, right? And then we have leverage over them. And, this guy's got some talent. He's going to come in. If it works out, great. If not, we're getting rid of him the minute we see this stuff surface. How many chances did Trent Brown and Jack Jones get? And the reason why was because the roster wasn't good enough, right? So before, it was like, well, we have Tom Brady, and we have like a balanced roster. And yeah, we'd love to have this guy here and he can help us, but we don't need him here, right? In fact, like when they had trouble with guys like that in the past, it wasn't like when they first got them, it was when they re-signed them. Like Randy Moss and Corey Dillon. Like, things went south with those guys, not while they were here on those conditions initially. It was when they got paid after that.
Right.
And so, with Trent and but even like with a Randy Moss, like, they knew when to say goodbye, even with a great, like a historic player like that.
Sure.
And now you got like Trent frickin' Brown and Jack frickin' Jones, but because you haven't done a good enough job stocking the roster, now it's like, well, if we don't have Trent Brown, what do we do at left tackle? And Trent Brown knew that. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah. Trent Brown knew, and there was one person I talked to felt like when Calvin Anderson got sick, because Calvin Anderson was one of the guys they'd brought in, that Trent Brown almost became emboldened to act the way that he had, like, to carry himself a certain way, because he knew the team was out of options.
Smart.
And then when he got, and then they gave him the contract. Then they gave him the contract bump.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God! Like, so instead of getting rid of the guy, you're gonna like pay him more just to do the right things now. It was. I mean, it was to me, it's like that's a broken culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas before, you bring up a good point about Randy Moss. It's like, what did Randy Moss do that was so horrible? Well, he didn't always finish his routes. And there was that one incident where he maybe spoke poorly to somebody in Minneapolis. Meanwhile, you got Trent Brown, Jack Jones doing all manner of things, and
Trent Brown like carrying like freaking assault weapons through the airport, and like
Jack.
Oh, Jack Jones.
Jack Jones.
Yes, Jack Jones and Trent Brown, who just doesn't even want to play. He just doesn't even want to play.
And by the way, that's not
the
shocking
DB.
either. It's not the first time.
Right, and it's like there's a pattern there, but if you're, they've gotten themselves into the point now where if you're an above
nonsense name.
It's like
anything
you
above
don't wanna
average, you can't get rid of them.
You don't want to be relying. Like, you can bring in guys like that. You don't want to be relying on them. You don't want a guy like that to have leverage over you. And that's what ended up happening, is that they had guys like that who had leverage over them. And
so let me ask you this too, because you and I have talked about this before, about Bill and his ability to coach, and nobody thinks he can't coach anymore. And the wins over the Bills, and I think you mentioned maybe the Bills win and the Steelers win too in your column. It's indicative of that. And even though I think that game against the Jets, this weather equalizer game, that's a game that Bill never would have lost. Hell, he won like that in Buffalo last year. But, this is a different Bill. It's a different team. There's just not enough there. The question is that ability to coach and the game plan and what players will say about him, his ability to know what a team is going to do. What percentage of that is being a head coach? Because there's a lot more that goes into being a head coach, identifying personnel strengths and the game day stuff and the sideline stuff. Sure, I'll grant you that he's still one of the best at it. But in the pie that makes up a head coach, how big a piece is that?
It depends on what team. I know it sounds like a cop out, but it is like with certain teams, like the head coach has a big say in personnel and has a big say in, like, I mean, even like stuff like, all right, like, who's the strength coach? What does the weight program look like? What does the off-season program look like? Like, some teams is set up where the general manager handles a lot of that. Other teams is set up where the head coach handles it. So I would say the game day stuff, I still feel this way, though. Like, I think we all overrate how important, like, play calling is. Like, I do think, like, and I brought this example up on the midday show yesterday. Sean McVay is so much more than a play caller, and if I had to rate that guy's strengths, like, offensive play calling would probably be like number 5 or 6.
Wow.
Like, it'd be pretty far down the list of like what I think he does well.
Managing egos, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and I brought up the example, like, one of the things the Rams liked most of, and this is like where you get into like why I think Mayo could be really good, because one of the things the Rams liked most when they hired McVay, and I had talked to them through that process and everything else, and I had known Sean when he was at the Redskins, so I had like pretty intimate knowledge of what of how they were thinking there and what they were looking at with McVay, and they started to call around players, to guys who played for him in Washington, and one of the things I remember them saying to me was like, look at that huddle. And it's like, okay, so you have Kirk Cousins, who displaced Robert Griffin III. You've got an awkward situation at quarterback. You got Trent Williams, who at that point had had every problem in the world off the field. You have Deshaun Jackson, who'd been an issue everywhere he'd been. Pierre Garçon could be like very hot and cold from a personality standpoint.
French.
Jordan Reed was a little weird. Like, you had all of these guys that if you had 2 of them in that huddle, it might have been a problem for a coach. And he had like 5 of them in there. And they were one of the best offenses in the league. And it was like, that's like Tomlin. It's like an ability to manage guys who have different issues, guys who have egos, like, and that's, to me, like, that's what Tomlin was when he was at his best. Like, the ability for the Steelers to cast a wide net and go bring in talent from anywhere, and you're not that worried if a guy's got an issue because Mike's going to handle it, right? For how long did we not know what a problem Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell were?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Best
I mean, we
head
talked
coaching
about
job
that
ever.
Yeah, I mean, the minute, well, Le'Veon Bell just stopped. I mean, he fell apart.
No, but second he went to the Raiders.
No, but Antonio Brown, like, I mean, yeah,
he was like the good guy.
We had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, he was on the cover of Madden. Like, he was.
Mike Wallace was kind of the ego guy. Remember that? Like, and it was just like, oh well, and the Steelers actually paid Antonio Brown because Mike Wallace wouldn't take the contract, and they had Emmanuel Sanders in that huddle, who was a big personality. So, yeah, Hardy, to your point, this is my typical long-winded way of answering the question, but that is a huge part of it. Like, managing egos, managing personalities, getting engagement. And I think, honestly, like, that's why in this day and age, which is different than 25 years ago, That's why the ex-players, that's why it's working with ex-players. And we focus so much on the offensive play caller thing. And I think Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are two of the 5 best coaches in the league. And Matt LaFleur does a good job. And Mike McDaniel does a good job. I think I've known those guys forever. I think all those guys are excellent. But it's not the only way to go. No. Like the ex-player route, if you look at the recent history of it, Dan Campbell in Detroit, Mike Vrabel in Tennessee, Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, DeMeco Ryans in Houston, it's working. So there's not just one way to do it.